Liberty University, Feuds 512, American Revolution. Author Thomas Kidd, George Whitefield. America's Spiritual. Founding Father, Chapter 7.
Hi, my name is Curtis Roynstead. I am here in Monmouth County, New Jersey at Old Tennant Church off of Tennant Road here in my home county. I am at this location because this is the spot where George Whitefield and Gilbert Tennant actually spoke to an audience of between 20 to 30,000 people. I'm privileged enough to only live about 15 minutes away from here, and I couldn't think of a possible better location to discuss the chapter for which I chose relating to George Whitefield and his travels between New England and Georgia, where he stopped along the way here in New Jersey, as well as some of the other middle colonies. I also find it interesting that even though this was a Presbyterian church, but overwhelmingly so, George Whitefield is welcomed here. As a matter of fact, the brother of Gilbert Tennant was the primary pastor here at the time. And it didn't matter. The denominational aspects of this stuff didn't really make a difference at this point. And that was kind of some of the infancy of how I believe the revolutionary spirit started kind of coming about, especially in as early as 1739, where the denominational and nationality-oriented differences in Americans didn't matter as much. People wanted to be able to practice the faith in the way in which they understood it. And of course, Whitefield being a Wesleyan, as followers of the Wesley brothers, he was very much towards the new light and the new birth. And he spoke about that often, of how even some members of the clergy could still find salvation unless they had a new birth, where they actually were born again. So a lot of the new Great Awakening period was really started right about here. So one of the other things that is discussed here in chapter 7 of the book relating to Whitefield, who again spoke at this pretty incredible location back in 1739 in front of between 20 and 30,000 people, is that there was a disconnect, especially as he was transitioning back to England in 1741, because of the controversy with the Wesley folks, where John and Charles Wesley had, of course, had a lot of back and forth with Whitefield. Even though they were very close friends and they eventually did reconcile, there was a lot of controversy for the idea of the elect, and Whitefield, of course, had his theology was slightly different than Wesley, and they kind of disagreed on this. And actually, at some point, they even talked about how they were just going to keep it at the important points, right? They weren't going to try to separate the church when he got back over to England. But he did feel that it was much easier, according to the text, to preach and to spread the message here in America. And I believe that's most notably because of the fact that over here, the denominational aspects of it didn't mean as much. One of the other things that's interesting is that in England, especially as there was an official church of England, right? You had the church, the Anglican Church of England, which Whitefield originally came from. Over here in America, we didn't have a centralized church. So this is a Presbyterian church, and yet Whitefield was welcome here. As a matter of fact, Gilbert Tennant, who was the brother of William Tennant, the main pastor here at the time, became one of the most instrumental people also in this Great Awakening period. Gilbert Tennant was actually had done the pilgrimage with Whitefield, and pretty incredible story. And it just continued and continued from here on in. And thank you. So the last thing I'd like to say is Happy Easter, and I think it's of no coincidence that I'm having the privilege of being able to speak here from the spot where George Whitefield spoke in 1739 along with Gilbert Tennant. And I find it really interesting that this particular week, as a matter of fact, this Easter weekend, is actually going to be the release of the movie relating to George Whitefield, The Great Awakening, who again has such an incredible history at this very spot. And I want to wish everybody a happy Easter, and it's been my privilege to talking to you about George Whitefield and his role in the Revolution, and specifically the text that I read to discuss this and some of the other ancillary sources that I also used. I want to thank you and happy Easter. Goodbye.
Thank you for watching, and have a happy Easter.